Good luck, Tripti ma'am.
Good evening, friends.
Thank you.
So, welcome to the next session, or we can say this is our now fifth session of CBME in Physiology. Till now, what we have covered is uh, first was keynote address, followed by distribution of group and work. Then we have understanding of competency table, and last week we have essay law framing by Dr. Swapnil Parlikar and Dr. Mathangi madam. And today I am happy to introduce two faculty who are going to take you to SGD, okay, and SBL. So starting with the small group learning, or you can say small group discussion. So Dr. Pratibha madam is going to take the first part, and second part will be taken by Dr. Trupti Srivastava. So without wasting much time, over to you, madam. Please start, ma'am.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. Let me quickly begin with thanking Dr. Sanjay Bedi sir and Dr. Chinmay for introducing me to this great group. And I would like to thank my co-presenter, Dr. Trupti, for planning and coming up with this session together. I would like to thank Matangi ma'am, my teacher, my mentor, my favorite professor, for introducing me to all of you. And I would also like to share my deepest condolences to Dr. Sanjay Bedi, who's mourning the death of his father, on behalf of all of you. And with that brief introduction, let me begin today's session. So when I titled the session, I first put it as small group discussion, and then I put it as small group learning, and then I put it as small group teaching. And then I realized, like, what a beautiful technique we are all set to learn today, with something that could be a teaching tool, something that could be a learning tool, a combination of teaching and learning in the form of discussion. So this is one of my favorite topics and techniques in medical education. I would like to begin with this quote. By separating teaching from learning, we have teachers who do not listen and students who do not talk. And how do we bridge the gap? So, Chinmay sir, can we have the first poll? It is recommended that didactic teaching, I'm not able to see the poll. Yeah, it is recommended that didactic teaching be restricted to dash percentage of the time allotted for any discipline. So the options are a little different. Less than 1/3, more than 1/3, less than 2/3. That is the option here. Less than 1/3, less than 2/3, more than 1/3. I'm just repeating the options. Option A is less than 1/3 of the total time. Option B is less than 2/3 of the total time. And option C is more than 1/3 of the total time allotted for any discipline.
You will not be able to tick on it. You can just touch it. We will be able to see your response.
Chinmay sir, I'm not able to view the poll results.
Yeah. I am also checking there.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Yeah.
It is first 1/3.
Yeah.
Madam,
Less
answer is
than
one
one
third.
third, less than one third, less than two thirds, more than one third.
More than one third.
More than two thirds. These are the options. How much percentage of the didactic teaching should occupy the entire teaching session?
Okay. Yes. So I am again posting the poll. Same poll I am again posting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. It is recommended that didactic teaching be restricted to how much of the total time allotted for any discipline?
It's 47 people have voted.
Yes, sir. 58%, 60%. Yeah. I think we can.
Yeah. So should we close?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is just to get
Okay.
a brief idea.
Okay. Okay then.
Great. So the only way to probably bridge the gap is to bring the students and the teachers on a more informal and a closer platform, which probably we could do with small group teaching. And the answer is less than one third. Most of you have got it right. So let's take a small pit stop here. What do you think is the most challenging part of reading research papers? Any research paper? You could just put a few answers in the chat window or in the WhatsApp main group. What do you think is the most challenging part of reading any research paper? This is just a general question. Yes? Anyone? Reading a research paper, what do you think would be the most challenging part for any of us here? I would personally feel, looking at the graphs and looking at box plots and yeah, understanding the discussion, statistics, fantastic, graph, beautiful. So to me also, I had the same problem. So applying the statistics, understanding the tables and the graphs and the statistics and applying it in the discussion, as most of you had put it up beautifully on the WhatsApp group. Likewise, when I looked at all the MCI documents, with no offense to anyone who sat on the group to prepare those documents, I found them very dry. I found them extremely boring also. So I thought, I would, but having having a lecture along, I thought, let me look into what I can pull out of these papers, and I found a fabulous amount of information in all these documents. Are you able to, see my screen with the GMER?
Yes,
Are
ma'am.
you able? Yes, fantastic. Okay. So moving on to the GMER, regulation paper, when I went ahead and typed just small group or small in the PDF, I found some few pages giving some extraordinary amount of information about small group and how to use them. So first of all, they say teaching learning methods shall be learner-centric and shall predominantly include small group learning, interactive teaching methods, which is once again incorporating small group learning in the large group learning methods, and case-based learning, which is yet another way of executing small group learning in a fantastic way. Moving on to page 75, it is clearly stated that it is recommended that didactic teaching be restricted to less than one third of the total time allotted for that particular discipline, and greater emphasis to be given on hands-on training, symposia, seminar, and there comes once again small group discussions, problem-oriented and problem-based discussions, and self-directed learning, which Dr. Trupti will be covering. It's beautifully said that learners must be encouraged to take active part and they must share the responsibility along with the teacher in executing these small group discussions. So going back to my presentation, the objectives of the session would be to describe small group teaching or learning, discuss the need, list the types, List the roles of the various stakeholders, especially the facilitators and the students. List the requirements, advantages, limitations, and challenges of small group teaching. I'll be giving more importance to the tools and what is there in the set of the guidelines. So let's take the next poll. How much is too much? Chinmay sir, could you please post the poll too?
Yeah.
Small group teaching in various forms for human physiology must be around dash number of hours in the entire academic training that is being given. Approximately 100 hours, approximately 200 hours, approximately 300 hours. How many hours do you think in the entire human physiology that we teach should comprise of about small group teaching in various forms? Okay, we're going to discuss the various forms, but what is your thought? Great. Had I been given this question as an audience or as a participant, I would have also gone to choose approximately 200 or 300 hours. Sir, can we please close the poll? Yeah, but when we take a look at the GMER, in page number 69, we have a table here, okay? And that beautifully tells us how much of small group teaching needs to be integrated. Small group teaching or tutorials or integrated learning or practical, all of which put in the form of various forms of small group teaching sessions comes close to around 310 hours. I would also take the liberty to suggest that they haven't mentioned any number of hours for early clinical exposure, but personally, I feel early clinical exposure could also be done in the form of small group teaching for an effective introduction of the clinical scenario to the first year student. And so we shall continue on this. So it is very surprising. It was equally surprising for me to know that so much has to be shifted from the didactic teaching to the small group teaching. So what is small group teaching or learning? It is a learning in the social context wherein the group could comprise of the student or the teacher or a student-student interaction. And we no more will be using the word teacher, we would be shifting to a more beautiful word called facilitator. As we see, the role shifts from a teacher-centered approach to a learner-centered approach where the teacher becomes one among the learners, okay? And there is no stopping to learning as a facilitator. And I would like to highlight the word non-sporadic, meaning there is nothing random, there is nothing spontaneous, there is nothing unplanned about small group learning. It is a very systematic and intentional method of learning where everything is planned ahead during the session and everything is brainstormed and understood and evaluated at the end of the session for a better session in the upcoming days. So it is non-sporadic. You need a blueprint. You need extensive planning while doing small group teaching or learning sessions. It can be used as a base method. Say, for example, you're teaching anemia as a completely vertically integrated session. We could pick up a case, introduce the case or the linker of anemia, and then combine all the departments and go as a vertical integration model for teaching anemia, wherein small group learning or teaching is the base method used for teaching that entire module of anemia. On the other hand, we can also use it to complement other approaches, wherein we do certain sessions as large group, and as a part of the large group interactive lectures, we can have a small role play, or we can have one day, you can have a large group teaching, and it can be followed by multiple small group discussions. So we're going to see that a little bit more in detail. But the three common characteristics of small group teaching include active participation, which therefore requires planning and preparation from the facilitator and the student. We need to come to the session with the plan in mind for that particular day. Choose a specific task, which is why case-based learning sessions or problem-based learning sessions work very well with small group learning, because we had chosen a particular task. We run through it through one session, two session, one day, multiple days in different forms. And the most important thing is reflection. We sit together as a group and reflect at various parts. What needs to be learned, meaning we reflect to set the objectives for the session. As we are learning, the facilitator keeps a watch if the student is learning effectively. And finally, have we learned what we wanted to learn. So reflection is another key aspect of small group learning. So how do we go about this small group teaching? As you know, fired up physiology faculty from all over the country sitting together to set SLOs. Whatever SLO that we choose, how are we going to implement as various models of small group teaching? Chinmay sir, can I have the third poll? Sir, not this one. Small group teaching can be done with, there are 4 options. Could you change it, sir? Small group teaching can be done with the help of role plays, skills lab, bedside teaching, all of the above. Oh, great. So I guess, you know, this is just to, you know, refresh the part that gone are the days when we were only teaching concepts or the knowledge domain using small group teaching, whereas we could teach small group teaching through role plays, in the skills lab, in the clinical scenario, and therefore the answer is all of the above. So we can close the poll. Thank you. Most of you got it right. Fabulous. Can we have the next poll, sir? Demonstrate the previous one that you posted. So 80% had voted and 99% had said that all of the above. Yes, you're right. Chinmay sir, can we have the next poll? Chinmay sir? Okay. Fine. So demonstrate ability, at least 6%. Yeah, sir has put it up. Okay. Demonstrate ability to communicate to patients in an empathetic manner. Can be taught in small groups. False, true. Okay, so 77% have voted and close to 80%, and they say 6% have answered it as false. I would like to bring to your notice that most of you are right in saying that we can teach attitude, we can demonstrate the ability to communicate to patients in an empathetic manner. It could be a patient-doctor communication which the student observes, or there could be a small video that is played and a reflection that happens in a small group, or we could ask the students to come up with a role play to discuss the importance of empathy. Attitude can be taught through small group sessions. So moving on, why do we need small group teaching? Primarily because we need to ensure that they have a better understanding of the topic, and then to make aware of beliefs and views. So we are shifting from knowledge to attitude domain here to increase the ability to problem solve and reason. If we had looked at Matangi ma'am's lecture and Swapnil sir's lecture last week, we spoke about the elevating verbs and thereby setting higher objectives for the learner. So problem solving and logical reasoning. And as we move towards attitude, to enhance empathy and sensitivity towards patients, to increase the responsibility for self-learning. Trupti ma'am will be talking about that. And not about just learning knowledge, attitude, and skills, to develop interpersonal skills, team working skills, practical skills, doing things together in a small group, better listening skills, setting objectives, sharing responsibility, listening, agreeing to disagree. So many things can be taught with small group teaching. So, as we discussed, these are the advantages. something that I really liked most was it helps the student and the facilitator to organize and arrange knowledge in ways that are very meaningful. Thereby, you get a deeper understanding of the topic. Student learns what is exactly supposed to be learned, and it also benefits the teacher sitting in a small group and understanding where the student is missing out and where the student is doing better so that we can facilitate accordingly. So moving on, what are the roles and requirements? Yes, we need a facilitator. And can you please answer in the WhatsApp group or on the chat window? What do you think? Do you think the facilitator must be a subject expert? Is it okay if he is not a subject expert at times? What is your, I'm waiting for you in the WhatsApp group. Do you think the facilitator needs to be a subject expert? There are a couple of questions. We can probably take them in the end. Need not be. Fantastic. So there must be subject experts. Fabulous. So I was looking for this controversy. So when it is extremely a subject specific topic, yes, it would be better for the subject expert to introduce the topic, but it is no more a rigid scenario where the subject expert has to be there because we've moved from teaching to facilitating. Most of the learning can happen between the students, and the teacher has to assume the role of a facilitator and facilitate discussion, which, having completed undergraduation and having a fairly reasonable understanding of entire curriculum being taught in phase 1, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and even across the years, we can share responsibilities and act as facilitators. We need not be uh, subject experts. And someone has shared a very beautiful point that if there is a checklist, which is exactly what I spoke about, blueprint and planning, we can proceed with this. We need to set the ground rules. Student needs to come prepared. Learning objectives have to be done. The tasks have to be planned. Remember, I once again say non-sporadic. And somebody says in the chat window that it's better if he or she is a subject teacher. Yes, but if it isn't, it doesn't stop us from moving forward. And someone has beautifully said that it depends on the number of faculty, and we can import faculty from other departments, especially when we do modules on anemia, jaundice, thyroid. I think brilliantly we can combine the staff of all the 3 departments and come across with small group teaching, because one of the most important problem that we have is lack of staff and dividing them into so many groups. So someone has already asked if in a 250, what would be the number of groups? Be it 100 or 150 or 250, the group composition depends on something called criticality feasibility. I would like you to know how important is the topic to be taught as a small group method, and how feasible it is in your particular institution. Based on that, you decide the group composition, but an ideal group would be 8 to 10 and at times 8 to 15. Okay, the group composition can be only students, can be student and facilitator, can be students across the various years in the clinical side, can be a mix of faculty, postgraduates and undergraduates. Let your imagination run wild. It's just that you have to plan the session properly. Of course, these are commonly met with challenges of infrastructure, having enough rooms, having enough seating, whiteboards, having feedback forms, and understanding how the session went on. These are some of the requirements. So the planning, it is very rigid to discuss in a session like this because we come from different kinds of institutions with different advantages and facilities. So however, one need not stop himself or herself from doing a small group discussion because of these challenges. We can plan it within the available resources. So Chinmay sir, I would like you to put up the poll. Please look at the picture here and identify the technique.
We have put 50% voted.
Yeah, this is a little tricky question, and I can see that the replies are scattered around. Yeah. And this is exactly where I would be spending another 5 minutes, and we would move on. So we could stop it here, sir, because I will take a quick discussion on the types of small group learning. Okay, I closed the poll because we are having a very varied reply, and that indicates that we need to stop here and understand. This is a typical fishbowl technique, okay, with a group of participants seated in the center, a smaller group, and a larger group of observers sitting around and watching the team dynamics and the discussion that is happening in the center. See, forget the jargons, but we all, as all these different types, fishbowl, bus group, X, Y techniques are something that we've known in the last decade. At least I have known it in the last decade after starting my training in medical education. We had all had these different kinds of sessions like tutorials as an undergraduate medical student. We've had seminars and journal clubs as postgraduate students. We had all taken workshops to learn research methodology, to learn a particular software or a particular technique in physiology. We've all tried our hands in problem-based learning while we started off with integration in the early days. During my post-graduation in 2005 was when I was first introduced to this concept of problem-based learning. Then we have these PG entrance group preparations where we sat as groups and led ourselves, and co-curricular activities done as small groups. So we were all exposed to small group teaching in one form or another in our early days as undergraduate, postgraduate student, or early days of being a faculty. And then we went on to take these fine-tuned training programs in medical education and came across a number of terms. Crossover groups is nothing but having groups, if you have a group of, let's say, 50 students, I'll divide them initially into 4 groups of red, blue, green, and yellow. Allot them a color and divide. And then I say red and yellow mix, blue and green mix. That's one way of crossing over. Or I say 5 red and 5 yellow will mix now, 5 blue and 5 green will mix now. So form another. So you cross over people. Basically, they sit together, have a discussion, then they cross over and they exchange their views. Bus groups can be done as a part of a large group teaching also, or as a small workshop wherein you can make a horseshoe shaped discussion. Like, this is typically happens in a conference room where you have 30 to 50 people. You can put on the smart board, take the initial lecture, then ask them to go into smaller groups, discuss the concepts, come back. So this created this sound called buzzing, and therefore they say that this was named as buzz groups. Snowballing. How do you make snowballs? Take a little snow, add to it, keep adding to it, and keep adding to it. So, first you call 2 people, ask them to have a discussion, add another 2 more, ask them to add extra points, and keep adding until you become saturated with the points. This is one nice way to avoid repetition of discussion while doing it in small groups. Fishbowl is something that we saw now in the TV reality shows. We see a small group doing the active discussion in the center while the larger group sits outside and observes. You can opt to come in to participate or allow them to just be the audience. Debates, role plays, which can be quickly introduced as 2 to 5 minute session in between your large group teaching also, or you can have it only as a separate session and do a debriefing. In the simulation lab, we can do small projects, we can do brainstorming, group rounds in the clinical scenario. These are the various types. So the last poll for the day, Chinmay sir, can you please put up the poll?
Yeah.
Formative or internal assessment can be done during a clinical case-based or a problem-based small group session. True or false? Yes, sir. So I think we can close it because most of them have got it right. It can be done. I'm surprised to see that about 10% of the people thus far have, said it's false. Formative, the word formative or internal assessment means that you are contributing to the development or the in the formative years of the student. We contribute to their development by giving them feedback, assessing them and giving them feedback and giving them a chance to become better. So yes, definitely during a small group problem-based learning or a case-based learning, we can do any type of assessment, preferably with the checklist, because we can give an objective answer to the student as to how far he has done. But we can also have subjective experience sharing, or they can summarize what they learned, and we can grade them for that also. That kind of, we get to know what they've understood and also understand how beautifully they can present, summarize what they have learned. So internal assessment or formative assessment can be definitely done during small group discussion. And anything, the common saying, assessment drives learning. The student definitely is more keen during the small group discussion once he or she knows that he would be evaluated in the end. So learner-centric teaching definitely revolves around formative assessment and feedback, and therefore one should concentrate on definitely assessing the student during the small group teaching session. I'll take another 2-3 minutes and conclude my session. Looking into the GMER page number 82 or 83, you can see that internal assessment shall be based on day-to-day assessment. It shall relate to different ways in which learners participate in the learning process. We can look at their assignments, their preparation for seminar, how they presented the case, how they prepared for that presentation, how did they their problem solving. We can also look at how they performed in a practical class or in a skill station in a simulation lab in a small group session. So I just wanted to highlight that it is there in the regulations that formative assessment can be done for small group teaching sessions. Just introducing you one more fabulous document, our 8Com module, which begins with small group discussion in the theoretical context. And while skill teaching, we can use DOAP, demonstrate, observe, assist, and perform. Yet another model where we can include small group teaching. So looking at this particular document, once again, I would like you to write, just small, and it picks up all the pages which gives you information about small group teaching. Looking at this session, see, we can have a beautiful problem-based learning session wherein you can have a large group lecture, we can have small group sessions, we can have self-directed learning, and this is a beautiful blend of large, small group teaching and self-directed learning. We have this in page number 18. And we can use small group discussion to introduce a concept. Say, for example, one of the modules, module 1.1, what does it mean to be a doctor? What we did in our college was we had a lecture by our dean on describe the professional qualities and roles of a physician. And on the next day, we split them into smaller groups with various faculty leading them as facilitators, wherein they had answered questions as, why did they choose to become a doctor? What do they think are the privileges, and so on. This can be preferably done in a small group discussion, as mentioned here. Moving on, we can see that it's not necessary that we should have it only for theoretical or attitude teaching. We can do it for bedside teaching. In phase 1, we can use it for early clinical exposure. We can have a checklist so that we can do a formative assessment then and there if the student had learned what we wanted to teach them. Look at this, another 8Com module. Demonstrate the ability to communicate to patients in an empathetic manner. We can teach attitude using a mixture of methods, large group, self-directed learning, and small group discussion. Look at this. To close a session with reflection by students. This is exactly what I was telling. In a large group, many of the students may not open up. So conduct a few large group sessions. You can show, whatever. But finally, put them in small groups, sit with them, talk to them, and allow them to express themselves. This develops interpersonal skills, communication skills, and helps them come out of the shell and express what they feel about the process of learning medicine. And then to move on, we can also have a session where they can express their co and extracurricular activities like poetry, prose, and sketches as small group discussion. And then look at this, a melange, a collection of different kinds of small group sessions where we can teach attitude and skills. You have an introductory small group session, then you have a focused small group session to teach them, then you put them in the skills lab, ask them to do give them a scenario, ask them to perform it, debrief it, closure. So a variety of small group models can be used once again. And the last document that I would like you to show is the skill module, okay, wherein we can see that we can use 1-minute preceptor model or the SNAPS model. This is for the clinical scenario. But page number 20 gives a beautiful understanding of what is 1 minute preceptor and SNAPS model. Moving on, once again, I have told all of these things. The challenges could be there, okay, but then small group teaching is a beautiful tool to use. And assuming the role of a facilitator, I feel one can do absolute justice to teaching knowledge, attitude, or skill to the undergraduate learners. So thank you for your patient listening. I pass it over to Trupti ma'am. Chinmay sir, thank you for putting up the polls. You could shift the presenter role to Trupti ma'am to talk about self-directed learning. Meanwhile, I can go through the questions and come back later. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
thank you very much, ma'am, for this presentation. Now we have Dr. Tripti Srivastav for our next part of the session, self-directed learning. Over to you, madam. You can start. Just put up your slide so.
Okay. Yeah, I did that. Is it visible?
It is visible as a slide only. You need to click on the slide so.
No, I shifted to slideshow. I've done slideshow.
Okay. Can you press F?
Is it there? Is it
Escape press?
visible as a
No,
slideshow?
no. I am just again making presenter. Yeah. Now it will come. Now it's there. Okay, you can start.
Come.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. Dr. Pratibha has done a wonderful presentation. I thank Dr. Chinmay for being here, Dr. Mathangi, Dr. Gade madam, and all the respected teachers of physiology. I'm extremely sorry that I'm not very active on the group and for putting up with me. Hope this session on SDL make us all aware of the need to have self-directed learning attribute or skills in our undergraduates, and when they become a Indian medical graduate, the best gift which we give them is a self-directed learning skills. In this session, we'll be mainly talking about the need of SDL in undergraduate education. We'll be talking about we'll actually comprehend the congruence of SDL to various learning theories, the steps for effective SDL, various strategies which we can use, because this is the most gray area. When this new GMER has come, it has given us a lot of hours of SDL in our curriculum, right from first MBBS. If you have seen the curriculum, I've shared the GMER in the WhatsApp group also. You will realize that all the professional years have got a specific hours of SDL without a clue as to what has to be done in that hour, how we have to utilize that. So we'll discuss about it and the challenges in actually organizing self-directed learning activities. Now, what do you think? You can just write on your chat box what is common about all these great people. What do you think? Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, Henry Ford, they all absolutely, they all are self-made, and most of them, they actually were dropouts. They did not complete their college years, but they were learning, and they were learning all their life. So does it mean that actual schooling or formal education doesn't play a role? No, it does. It does play a role, but one of the important components of formal education is to instill the self-directed learning abilities. And so important this is, it was actually stated by many different bodies. So the License Commission of Medical Education, the Accreditation Council of Graduate Medical Education, the American Board of Internal Medicine, they all have collectively said that please make your learners self-directed learners, make them lifelong learners. And now our the Indian medical graduate, which our GMER recommends, has given us the 5 roles. Of these 5 roles, if you really reflect on these 2 roles, a lifelong learner and a professional. To be a lifelong learner, you need to be self-directed, because after you complete your graduation, your post-graduation, your super specialty, nobody is going to say that, come on, learn new things, come on. You have to every time go on, open your textbooks, open your journals, open your ebooks and see what's new. So that particular zest for knowledge has to be instilled when the student is still learning. Second is professional. As professionals, we all, when we know a medical professional is changing overnight. Imagine this COVID scenario, everything has changed completely. And this change overnight, the information boom is available. How we teach our students? So once they are out of our schools, medical schools, how do they learn? And for that, self-directed learning skills are absolutely important. Well, the purpose is clear. For our profession, it is ever changing. And for our students to survive in the field out there, they need to constantly revise, refresh their knowledge. And for that, they should have a quest, they should have a zeal to learn new things in a very systematic way. So it, like Dr. Pratibha was saying, everything has to be very systematic. Similarly, the self-directed learning skills should be so systematically ingrained in your learner that even if they are out of your school, they are in the right direction. They learn the right things in a right way. Okay, what do you think? SDL inherent trait, or it can be explicitly taught? You can still write on the WhatsApp group. An inherent trait, yes, or it can be taught to all the students. Can be taught. Okay, okay, someone is saying both. Okay, it can be explicitly taught. Okay, like something which is kind of, even at com, so attitude, ethics, communication, which was earlier a more of a hidden curriculum, which was not, it was implicit, it was more learned by just observing others, has now explicitly come into the curriculum. And similarly, yes, even the self-directed learning skills can be taught, but the major change which needs to take place here is, of course, the change of the role of a teacher to a facilitator. This paradigm shift is exceptionally important when we talk about SDL in particular. The facilitators or the mentor's role is most crucial if we really want the SDL or our self-directed learner to succeed in life. So we have to come out of our comfort zones of information provider, and we have to just facilitate their acquisition of knowledge. Now it's difficult, it's not simple. Let's see how. Now again, an excerpt of GMER, because this time we'll be talking about GMER since we are talking about the new curriculum. And I've just taken the first MBBS. You can see here, the first MBBS gives a lot of hours to the SDL. So anat, physiology, biochemistry, all of them have got self-directed learning hours. And you'll be surprised that most of the research on SDL has been done in the subject of physiology itself. So once this entire session is over, I would request you all to just Google in and see the SDL based projects, most of them, and the best journal, which will give you a number of articles in advances in physiology education. There are a lot many ways in which small topics have been taught by SDL, and there are a lot of controlled studies with simple didactic lectures in SDL, and you will see the few studies also give good outcomes. So we have to take in mind that every professional here is giving these hours. And as we make a timetable, we, like we did for first year, we placed SDL. But in this SDL, what exactly has to be done? For that, we had to take a separate workshop of the facilitators, for the teachers. And similarly, for the second year, third year, you will see that the SDL are checked, because curriculum becomes more vast, but SDL are still there. So what do you mean by SDL? How do you define it? It was given in 1975 by the father of adult education. It states that SDL is a process in which individuals take the initiative, with or without the help of others, in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. Well, absolutely crystallized. So they have to diagnose their learning need, what I need to learn. How do I learn? What will be the strategies and how will I evaluate my outcome, whether I have really learned it or not? Simple. However, 21st century, and we are not just talking about our professional knowledge, but we have to make a student or make a learner be competent enough to deal with real life situations in any way possible. And therefore, the definition of SDL was expanded. And now, if you see the self-directed learning as given by Long and Guglielmino is a dynamic combination of attitude and skills essential for dealing with the complexity that individuals face in all aspects of their lives. So now it is more broadened. So it can be anything. Encounter electrical disturbances in my home. His profession. And believe me, all the learning theories, I'll not go into the details, but all the learning theories, they in some way or the other, they embrace self-directed learning. So all of them, and most importantly, connectivist approach. You will relate this connectivist approach right now because in this situation, in the COVID scenario, when we are teaching our students more online, we are trying to reach out to them. They are learning, but if you reflect, we are struggling somewhere, struggling because we are not enough capable to deal with such situations where we have to go online completely, and our students are not tuned to learn in this way where they have a complete information boom on the internet and they have to organize their learning. So this connectivist approach is exactly this is about SDL, which states that knowing where to find the information as opposed to knowing the information. So this is what SDL is about: where to find the information, ability to navigate in online learning environments, ability to make connections to concepts as opposed to knowing the concepts, being able to stay current, and most importantly, presence of a facilitator who guides the learner to locate, evaluate, and select among a virtually endless amount of information. This is exactly what we are required to do now in this situation. We have to make our students learn not by just, we have kind of shifted from simple classroom to an online classroom, but it has to be something more than that. We have to even make our students learn as to how to find information, make connections between them, learn the concept, connect these concepts, and be a facilitator rather than being a teacher online. So this was Macom's world of SDL, and he has very beautifully given these steps. So whenever we give any SDL activity, we should see that these steps are incorporated in those activities. So the first step is, I would say, it should start from being teacher as a facilitator. So first of all, we have to keep in mind that now we are not a teacher. So if you have an SDL session, don't keep that session as a lecture or as a kind of practical. Don't put that. See, the teacher, whoever is allotted that session, has to be more of a facilitator. The first thing the students have to do, or initially you might have to do it for the students because your students are not aware of it, is to identify the learning need. What exactly should be learned, where the students are lagging behind, which should be, the gap has to be bridged. So that is identification of learning need. Second is development of learning learning objectives. So now I know what my learning need is. I make my objectives. So this is very clear. I don't think I need to go into the detail of it. So that learning objectives are defined. Once the learning objectives are defined, how I learn it. So it can be an online source, it can be an offline source, it can be a practical lab, it can be a museum, wherever. So that's identification of appropriate resources. Implementation of the process. So how I go with this process. So once I have defined my objectives, I have prioritized my objectives, I know the resources. Next thing is I have to go and actually learn it. And then commitment to a learning contract. Now, this is a step which is important as far as theoretical aspect is concerned. However, when we come practically to it, it's a kind of verbal contract. It's like my me and my students. SDL generally involves a small group. So me and my students, we come to a contract that yes, this is our learning need and this is what we will be learning and this is how we'll be learning. So it's a kind of contract between the teacher and or the facilitator and the student. And finally, once a student has really learned, you evaluate. And this evaluation is extremely important step because you have to close the loop of the learning need. So finally, the learning need has been evaluated, whether the learning objectives are met or not. And if not met, that again becomes your learning need. Okay, so it's a spiral. So this is how SDL has to be planned. And this is what I already discussed. So I'll just go rush to this because we do not have much time for this. This is the typical, it's known as a staged self-directed learning model. Very simple to state that not only a student evolves as a self-directed learner, even the teacher has to evolve as a facilitator. So the stage one is where it's a teacher-centered kind of a classroom. So from a teacher-centered kind of a classroom, if you really want to go towards a student center, you have to go through these stages of being authority, then being a motivator, then being a facilitator, and finally a consultant. Simple. So the student who was initially dependent on teacher completely becomes self-directed. And the strategies. So we come to this very important part, how SDL can be planned practically in our curriculum, particularly first year, and that too in physiology. So we have to basically, since it's more of a student-centered activity where the students are required to do it, and you have to act as facilitator, small group discussions are a very good way of instilling these skills. Second is seminars. So you give a particular topic to a small bunch of students, ask them to read it, make their objectives, make a presentation, present it in front of others, and discussions. Here, the facilitator does not do anything except just making them come on track. I think that reminds us more of the way the PBL is conducted. So problem-based learning does have a component of SDL in it. However, problem-based learning is not synonymous with SDL because even in problem-based learning, there may be few didactic lectures in between. So yes, but PBL do have SDL component. So we can have small projects in which students work upon case discussions. Flipped classrooms are very good way of self-directed learning. Then role plays, and now ICT, the web gives you plenty of opportunities through wikis, blogs, YouTubes, telegrams, video conferencing, educational tools, forums, listservs, search engines, etc., which are available and which can also be planned during the classroom. And the students can, if you have a kind of digital library where you can take up SDL activity there also. So this is how these various strategies can be adopted. Of course, the entire loop, keep in mind the knowledge steps in planning this entire SDL activity. And there are challenges because we need to address the challenges, otherwise we'll not be able to shift. This is a paradigm shift. This was never in our curriculum, and now suddenly it has come, and the challenges are big. The first challenge is we are constantly living in a kind of educational environment where we have been constantly being fed by the teachers. So they are the ones who are the reservoirs of knowledge, and they give us knowledge and we take that knowledge. So that was the behaviorist theory, where it was considered that the learner is an empty vessel and the teacher has to fill in that knowledge. So that theory it needs a shift where now probably even your learner is better informed than your teacher. Influence of power position of instructors. That's almost a similar thing where the teacher has to be more knowledgeable than the student, and therefore whatever the direction teacher gives is the direction in which the student moves. Prior schooling. So the way which we were taught in our schools was very much teacher centered, and therefore it is in fact few of the research papers also say that probably age is one of the factor which influences SDL skills, and we have to fight this norm that it is not that it is only the adults who are self-directed, but we have to instill these skills right from the childhood so that the student or the learner becomes self-directed from a very early age. Contextual factors such as traditional teacher-centered secondary education and the transition of a learner from teacher dependent to learner dependent mode. That's a very difficult transition, of course. So these are some of the challenges, but of course, the challenges, they will go slowly as now since it has come into the curriculum, it will take a while to completely blend into our system, and we make our students really self-directed, will make our teachers more of a facilitator. It will take some time, but it will come along. So let's not worry about it. Just remember that self-directed learning, whenever we plan those sessions, make the learners owners of their learning. So give them the onus, they have to learn. They are mainly required for extension of the learning, and they have to manage and monitor their own learning with the facilitator only observing them from a distance and just correcting them are if they have some errors or if they falsify somewhere. Okay, this is all about the SDL. I leave you with this simple quote: I never teach my pupils, I only provide the conditions in which they can learn. This is what we need to really do if we want our learners to succeed in life. Thank you very much, and the floor is open for questions and discussions.
Very short and crisp presentation, madam. So now you can ask your question either in the chat box or WhatsApp. Any of the format you can ask the question to any of the madam. So we have two uh, madams today, Pratibha madam and Trupti madam. So you can ask questions to any of them.
There's one question in the chat box about flipped classroom, and they've asked like, is it similar to problem-based learning? See, flipped classroom is one technique where you introduce the concept to the student before he comes to the class, either by giving a video or by a video lecture or some content to read, so that he comes with an idea preset in his mind. And then once he reaches the class, you can it is taken for granted that the base knowledge is already set with the previous information given, and you proceed with the further, the higher concepts can be taught in class. You could do a flipped video lecture earlier and do a problem-based learning later as small groups. It can be done in multiple forms, but as Dr. Trupti beautifully put it, it sets the stage for a fantastic self-directed learning. The student begins to take responsibility to learn something even before he comes for the class. This is my view for the question. Dr. Trupti, if you like to add, please do.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Pratibha. So basically, like flipping is something where you, in the classroom, you actually dedicate more time to solve the issues, to solve the queries of what the students have already learned. So you give a topic, you give some reading material, or you give an open-ended topic where they read and they come in the classroom, and thus the students learn how to read on their own, to learn on their own. That's what flipped classroom is all about. Yeah.
There's one more question. What must be the time for self-directed learning? And self-directed learning, assignment, submission, evaluation is a huge task with 250 students, how do we deal? Dr. Trupti, would you like to
Yeah,
answer?
actually, exactly. Because 250 students, a single teacher cannot do it. So therefore, if you remember in my presentation, I said it is mostly a small group activity when you do. So naturally, you need to have one teacher to 10 to 15 students is not possible in our scenario, but maybe 1 to 30 students, one teacher, 30 students can be there. And unless, because even if the students are learning on their own, they are not very seasoned self-directed learners when they come to the first MBBS, and we therefore need to see what they have learned. That is a very important caution which should be taken. Maybe later on when they develop these skills completely, you may not have to go often to look at into the learning part, but yes, initially we have to do it, and it has to be almost all the teachers of the department have to be involved in those SDL activity. That generally the curriculum gives you a few hours, so during these few hours most of the teachers have to be equally involved. Yeah, that's a challenge, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr.
Trupti,
Tripti, I
hello.
would like to just highlight and add something to what you said. As you mentioned in your
Yeah.
presentation, the COVID days had really, helped us to challenge the students in terms of self-directed learning. Taking technology to your aid, using quick Google Forms, quick polls like how we did now could be a very quick way of evaluation rather than asking them to come up with long written assignments, especially when we have 250 students and too much to handle. And the time for self-directed learning, both me and Dr. Trupti, we showed a page in the GMER document. That is just a reference. I think it's for us to go above or below based on our situations. Uh,
Hello, Dr. Trupti. Hello, Dr. Trupti.
yes,
There are two
yes, yes,
important questions in the chat box. Okay, please
yes.
answer those questions. One is topic for SDL can be already taught or whether it should be a new topic. And second is, are there any particular guidelines for the topics we can select for SDL or a consensus or it should be by consensus? Okay, both these
Yeah.
questions are important questions. Yeah.
Yeah. For the first thing, ma'am, whether the topic should be actually taught and then given for SDL. Well,
Hmm.
see, SDL, where a top, you can give a kind of baseline knowledge about the topic. And then
Yeah.
for digging deep into the topic, you can ask the students to learn more. That is one way of doing it.
Okay.
Because our
Yeah.
students are, you need to first give them a baseline knowledge. Say it's important, maybe you teach them physiology, and for the clinical application you ask them to learn more, see patients, go to the wards, learn more about it and come back, like that. So this is how you should do it. Coming to whether the topics have been identified, no, they are not identified as for a subject. It is more of a consensus, so the teachers need to sit together. Of course, there are references, as I said earlier, there are references for physiology where they have taken cardiac physiology as one of the type of SDL. I do not recollect what exactly in cardiac physiology, but I have read a reference again in advances in physiology education. So it is more of consensus between the teachers who sit together and think that this can be taken as a self-directed in a SDL mode. Yes. Dr. Pratibha would like to add something to it.
Yes, ma'am, I do agree. In the same line, somebody else has also asked another question with the small group teaching. So let me combine and answer it. In small group teaching or discussion, if there are different facilitators for different groups, how to maintain the uniformity in teaching. So this goes with the, as like how Dr. Trupti completed, whether it is a self-directed learning or small group teaching or discussion, a lot of prior planning is required. So especially when we are not using subject experts, being very specific to the question in terms of small group teaching, when there are no subject experts, what we have usually done is that we choose select modules where we do not use subject experts. And how to maintain the uniformity in teaching. See, uniformity in teaching was never there. It was always, teachers were preferred by students, teachers not preferred by students, boring teachers, fantastic teachers. Uniformity was never there, be it the traditional or the newer model. But then, in fact, better uniformity can be achieved with the prior planning of the faculty sitting together, setting SLOs and having checklists in the end to assess whether we have achieved our objectives. Then see, then again comes the question of, if we are going to put everything so rigidly in checklist and SLO and planning, the unique flavor of the particular teacher is gone. I wouldn't agree on that as well, because the way we conduct it boils down to the teacher finally. But we can all agree upon certain things so that a reasonable amount of uniformity can be there. Eventually, no child is same, and it is never going to be uniform teaching or learning between students. So that's my view actually on that. Trupti
Yeah,
ma'am, you have one more question as well, I saw.
yeah.
How
Two
about the
more
role of
questions are
early,
there. Yeah.
can early clinical exposure be self-directed learning? Somebody has asked that.
Uh, Actually, see, there are no clear-cut boundaries as to what cannot be way what cannot be in a way of SDL. SDL can be incorporated everywhere. So even if in early clinical
Hmm.
exposure, if you plan a kind of ward round of the students where the students have to see a patient of say anemia, if you accompany the patient, if students, you go there in the ward and you teach them everything then and there, it's kind of demonstration. If you ask a patient to go themselves, go to the ward, check for the patient of anemia, see what are the signs and symptoms, and report back to me. Now, this is what student goes, does, and comes back. So this is a part of where he actually did it himself. So that can be a part of SDL. So it is not something SDL can be incorporated anywhere and everywhere. But because it was never explicitly a part of our curriculum, MCA has given it a separate R where you can just make the students do some self-directed learning to begin with. And later on in your curriculum, you'll realize that everywhere you can put a, a small content of SDL. This you need to read on your own, learn on your own, do on your own, and report back. So yes, even in ECE, I would suggest right now don't do it. Let it be more of a observed activity, directed activity throughout. But later on, when you get more, when your students get more comfortable with learning on their own, then start inserting in with your routine classroom activities.
Okay. One more question is
So it's
there,
not a
Dr.
separate
Trupti.
entity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trupti, one more question is there. How to do assessment for this SDL? How can assessment be done? And second is, people are asking for some references, as you had mentioned in your presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
References I'll share in the WhatsApp
yeah,
group
please
itself.
share. Right, right.
Yeah. Assessment, again, as I said earlier, initially when your students need hand holding for SDL, you need to actually ensure that the learning objectives which were defined, the learning needs which were identified are really met with. And therefore, you need to assess by simple, it can be a simple multiple choice question, it can be a simple OSCE, whatever, depending on what the objectives were. So your assessment tools will come along. But later on, as your learner matures, he becomes more self-directed, then you don't need to assess him. In fact, he should be self-assessor. So that quality also should be instilled, where he undergoes self-assessment and reflection as a part of his own assessment, so that whether his learning needs are met or not, he has to reflect on it. And then the role of a facilitator fades away, slowly it fades away. So it starts with the more explicit assessment, and then later on more of a learner taking over the role of a self-assessor and reflecting on his learning skills. Yeah, that's it.
Trupti ma'am, there's a very interesting question. Can self-directed learning topic and the SLO be different for each student?
Of course it will be different, and that is the
Okay.
beauty of it, because
Yeah.
that is the beauty of it. Every learner is not the same. Every learner has got a different learning style, and therefore every learner has to know that there comes a role of metacognition. So I deliberately did not touch it, because that is where I am aware of what my learning styles are and what I need to learn. So yes, it will be different for every learner.
Yeah. There are two more questions, ma'am. Does an SDL change with a fast and slow learner? Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly.
And though that goes without saying, yes.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Seminar and project work, can they be assessed under self-directed learning? There's another question. Definitely,
They
right?
can be, yes, they can be labeled as self-directed learning. They are good tools of SDL.
There's another question, ma'am. Whether the change from dependent to self-directed learning with evaluation happens in the first year itself.
That depends on the learner, how your learner
Learner.
is.
Yeah. Great.
But if you ask me, in current scenario, it will be very slow. It will be very guided one, and do not expect your learners to be self-dependent from the beginning. They will take, because their schooling has been completely teacher-centered. So this basically, the entire trait of our students of our country is very different from the Western world. There they have to do most of the things on their own, so they know they are self-directed learners from the beginning. We are more cautious, and we want our students to be really focused in one right direction, and therefore we handhold them for at least for the schooling part, and therefore it takes time to learn these new skills.
Can jigsaw technique and concept mapping be used as self-directed learning teaching methods?
Concept mapping, yes. Concept mapping, in fact, some of the students do that. They as a teacher, you may not be aware of, but the learning style is through concept mapping. Jigsaw technique is a way of small group discussion method. Yes, it can be. It can be, if it is not teacher directed, or it is more the small group of students who are actually directing the entire discussion. It can be a SDL method, and therefore they go hand in hand most of the times. If you basically, SDL has to be always small group or individual tasks. You cannot take a 250 students together for an SDL session.
Someone has asked, self-directed learning topics are from must know or good to know?
It goes beyond that.
Yeah, I
It
know.
goes beyond must know, nice to know, desirable to know. It is where it is diving deep into knowledge. So it is not that you have to this learner, you cannot restrict your learner to just must know area. When you ask him to learn more about it, he may go to any extent.
How to know and guide individual students if they are getting the right information from the online sites for self-directed learning? Many wrong informations are available online. So this is a question.
Yeah, that's very important. First of all, the facilitator should be competent enough. They should know, first of all. So we first of all should learn about all these things, and then you have to keep a constant check. That is the role of a facilitator. That constant check has to be there, whether they are on the right track, they are looking at the right information, they are from the right resources. That much check you have to do, you have to keep. And therefore, as I said earlier, you cannot leave your learner because, okay, they are self-directed, so they don't need us. No, that is very important. That facilitator's role still is there, and it's a very different kind of a role.
Yeah, and here comes the role of small group discussion, because when they do self-directed learning, initially it could, like Trupti ma'am mentioned, it should never be done as a large group method. Have them in smaller groups, and although they are self-directed learners, initially it could be guided. And in fact, in our college, we have a program where we talk to them when it comes to doing the research projects, which is one area where they do self-directed learning. We have a 2-day, prior prepping program where we talk to them about how they go and find information, where they can go and find information. And also a strong mentor-mentee program in any institution can give them a chance to come back and check with their mentors. So the word facilitator and mentor gains a lot of importance here. And change is going to be extremely slow in this regard.
Pratibha ma'am and Trupti, I think we have done with most of the questions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You both have answered all the
Yes, ma'am.
questions. So, and if any of our participants have any query, we can always discuss this on the WhatsApp group. They are always welcome on the WhatsApp group. and in the Google Classroom also, right? So I thank you, both of you.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I would like to just state one thing.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, this
Please go ahead.
entire exercise, what we are doing. So basically, this entire exercise, the CBME group which we have formed, where we are defining our own objectives, what we are doing, we are actually self-directed learners here. This
Yeah.
is how self-directed learning occurs. We have
Yeah.
identified our learning needs. We have identified our objectives. We have identified the methods,
Yes.
and we are implementing it. So this is
Yes.
how
Yes. So
self-directed
true.
learning actually occurs.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. This is nothing but self-directed learning. You came on your own, joined this group, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also,
Okay. So
ma'am, the information
yeah.
has been, sorry to interrupt, ma'am. There's a
Yeah.
reflection sheet which is put up in the Google Classroom. I have shared an interesting, very brief article from BMJ on teaching small groups, and I've also shared the PDF of the PowerPoint in the Google Classroom. I think people can go through and come back with their questions later as well.
Okay. Okay. So please go through the reflection sheet, and we are sure you must have started preparing your SLOs only, as we can see it in the form of discussions on the various WhatsApp group. So best of luck. Go on, continue preparing your SLOs, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pratibha ma'am, and thank you, Trupti ma'am. Thank you. I will close this webinar.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shubha ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Chinmay. Thank you, Dr. Pratibha, and for
Thank you,
patient
Dr.
listening.
Trupti.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.